The discovery. John had spent years exploring the unknown corners of space, his spacecraft cutting through the fabric of the galaxy, gliding between the stars with a sense of wonder. The vastness of space had always fascinated him, the mysteries hidden within the shimmering depths of the cosmos. Yet, even with countless planets explored and alien species encountered, there was one place he had never been, an uncharted star system far from the prying eyes of civilization. It was a strange feeling, knowing that he was heading into the unknown without any sense of what he might find. His mission was simple: survey the planet and see if it could support life. However, as John descended into the atmosphere of the desolate world below, he realized something wasn't right. The readings from his ship's sensors were erratic, the atmosphere unstable, and the surface below appeared barren. Despite the troubling signs, John couldn't help but feel an overwhelming pull to explore. As he carefully guided his ship closer to the surface, his eyes scanned for any sign of life. The ground below seemed to twist and turn in chaotic patterns, a jumbled mess of rocks and craters. The once mighty mountains appeared eroded, worn down by time and neglect. But as his spacecraft flew lower, John spotted something unexpected, a wreckage, half buried in the rocky terrain. His heart skipped a beat. He wasn't prepared for this. Whoever had been here, whatever had caused the crash, it was clear that someone needed help. Without hesitation, he engaged the landing gear and set his ship down near the wreckage. The scene was eerily quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of his ship's systems. John took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever awaited him. He exited the ship, his boots crunching against the dry, cracked earth beneath him. The sun blazed down from the sky, casting long shadows over the landscape, but it was the wreckage that caught his attention. It was a twisted mess of metal, smoke still rising from it, remnants of an alien craft. Approaching cautiously, John surveyed the wreckage. Amidst the debris, his keen eyes spotted movement. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but no, it was real. A figure, slumped against a rock, barely visible in the shadows. John's heart raced as he moved closer, the shape becoming clearer with each step. It was an alien, a female, from the looks of it. Her skin was a soft lavender hue, her limbs slender and delicate, though battered by the crash. Her eyes, though filled with pain, shimmered with an otherworldly beauty, a glow that seemed to pulse with an energy all its own. She was clearly injured, her breathing shallow and uneven. John's first instinct was to help. He knelt beside her, reaching out cautiously, though he was unsure of how she might react. The alien's gaze flickered toward him, and though fear and distrust were evident in her eyes, there was also something else. A flicker of hope, fragile but undeniable. "Hey," John said gently, his voice soft, trying not to startle her. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help." The alien blinked at him, her lips moving in a faint whisper, though the words were unintelligible to him. John reached into his pack and retrieved his translator device, quickly activating it. The device hummed to life, and after a brief moment, the alien's voice came through in perfect English, albeit with a strange accent. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice raspy, filled with confusion. John smiled softly. "I'm John, a human. And you need help." The alien blinked again, as if processing his words. She seemed to weigh his offer, her distrust still present but tempered by the dire circumstances. After a long pause, she nodded slightly, a silent admission that she was willing to accept his aid. As John carefully lifted the alien princess into his arms, he realized that his journey had just taken a sudden and unexpected turn. He had no idea who she was or where she came from, but one thing was certain, he had to protect her. The story of how they came to be here together was just beginning, and it was a story neither of them could have predicted. Little did John know that this chance encounter would lead them into a deep and complex bond, one that would change the course of history for both humanity and the alien race she belonged to. The alien princess continued. As the days passed, the tension between John and the alien princess, Aerolise, slowly began to ease. What had started as a rescue mission was transforming into something deeper, a shared journey that neither of them had expected. Though the vast expanse of space had always felt so isolating, John found comfort in Aralee's company. Her presence was a quiet yet undeniable force, and as he learned more about her, the more he realized that the encounter was not merely chance, but fate. Aralee's strength became even more evident as she recovered. Her body was healing faster than John had anticipated, aided by the advanced medical technology aboard his spacecraft. Yet, despite her improving health, there was a profound weariness in her eyes. Every time she looked out the ship's viewports, her gaze seemed lost, searching the stars, haunted by memories that she wasn't ready to share. John had spent years charting unknown planets, but this was different. The more he saw Aralee, the more he understood that the true exploration wasn't of distant galaxies, but of the person beside him. She was not just a survivor of a devastating attack, she was a leader. A princess, yes, but also someone who had witnessed her people's destruction and was now fighting to understand her place in a galaxy that no longer felt like home. As John took on the role of both protector and companion, their conversations deepened. Aralee would speak in fragmented sentences at first, as though piecing together a narrative she had yet to accept. My planet, Naira, was rich with life, she would say, her voice trembling as she relived her memories. Our cities sparkled under twin suns. We had peace for generations. But each sentence would fade into silence, the weight of her past too heavy for her to bear. One afternoon, as they stood in the observation deck of the ship, watching the distant stars glisten like diamonds in the void, Aralee turned to John with a look that suggested she had made a decision. Tell me, John, she said softly, her eyes meeting his, do you ever think that the universe has a plan? That everything we do is part of a greater design? John paused for a moment, contemplating her words. He wasn't sure if he believed in destiny, but there was something undeniable about the connection they were forming, something that suggested that their meeting, however unlikely, might not have been an accident. I don't know, he replied, his voice thoughtful. But I do believe that sometimes we meet people for reasons we can't explain. Maybe we're supposed to help each other in ways we don't understand. Aralee smiled faintly, as though his words had given her some comfort, but there was still a distance in her eyes. She looked out at the stars again, lost in her thoughts. I used to believe in the stories of my people, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Of how the great cosmic forces guided us, how our ancestors were chosen by the stars to lead. I believed that our world was protected by something greater, something beyond us. She paused, her breath catching. But that was before Naira was destroyed. Before we were betrayed. John could feel the anger in her words, but also a deep sorrow, a longing for the home she had lost. He wasn't sure what had happened to her planet, but the more he listened, the more he realized that there was far more to Aralee than just the regal exterior she had shown him at first. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. Whatever happened, whatever the galaxy did to you, I promise, you don't have to carry that burden alone. Aralee looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, as though trying to decide if she could trust him. After a long silence, she spoke again, her voice tinged with pain. My people didn't just fall to an invasion, we were betrayed from within. A faction of our own rulers sided with the enemies. They sold us out for power. John's heart sank as he realized the gravity of her words. She wasn't just a victim of a foreign attack, she was the survivor of a deep, painful treachery. A betrayal that had been executed by her own kind, people she had once trusted. He couldn't imagine what that must have felt like. How can something like that happen? John asked, his voice soft, incredulous at the thought of such betrayal. How could they turn on their own people like that? Aralee clenched her fists, the anger burning in her eyes. Power, greed, fear. It has always been the root of our destruction. We were warned, but we couldn't stop it. And in the end, our enemies swept through Naira with little resistance. They razed our cities, burned our temples, and took our lives. It was over in a matter of days. John was stunned into silence. The sheer cruelty of what had happened to her people was almost beyond comprehension. And yet, Arelise had survived. She had escaped, not just with her life, but with the strength to carry on, to keep fighting. There was an unshakable resolve in her, and though it was born from pain and loss, it was a part of who she was. "How did you make it out?" John asked, his curiosity piqued by her survival. He couldn't imagine the horror she had witnessed, but he wanted to understand. Arelise's expression softened as she looked at him. "I was one of the last to escape. A few of us managed to flee in ships, but I don't know where the others went. I was alone when I crashed on this planet." She paused, her voice growing quieter. "I don't know if anyone else survived." John's heart went out to her. It was one thing to survive a catastrophe, it was another to be left alone, with no answers, no closure. Her grief was palpable, and it made John's protective instincts surge. He couldn't promise her that everything would be okay, he wasn't sure what the future held for them. But he knew that, for now, he would help her find what she had lost. He owed her that much. "I'm sorry," John said, his voice sincere. "I can't imagine what you've been through, but I'm not leaving you. You're not alone." Arelise didn't respond immediately, but she didn't need to. The way she looked at him, the way her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly, told him everything he needed to know. For the first time since they had met, she seemed to believe him. And in that moment, John realized that this was only the beginning of their journey, one that would take them both into uncharted territories, both of space and of the heart. The path ahead was uncertain, but John was no longer just a rescuer. He was her ally, her friend, and perhaps, if the stars were willing, something more. A growing connection continued. The days turned into weeks, and the connection between John and Arelise deepened. The silence that had once filled the spaces between them now carried a quiet understanding. As Arelise regained more strength, she began to contribute more actively to their survival. She wasn't just a princess or a survivor anymore, she was an equal, someone who shared the responsibility of navigating through the uncertain galaxy with him. John had learned to trust her instincts, her knowledge of the stars, and even her combat skills, which she demonstrated one afternoon when a small group of hostile space scavengers attempted to board his ship. Though still recovering from her injuries, Arelise had dispatched them with surprising precision, using a combination of technology and raw skill. John was in awe of her, not just because of her prowess, but because of her resilience. It became evident that her strength was not just in her ability to fight, but in her spirit. One night, as they sat around the small fire inside the ship, their quiet conversation shifted from survival to something more intimate. John had been adjusting the navigational controls, but Arelise had a way of pulling him out of his focus, making him look beyond the endless stretches of space. "Do you ever wonder why we meet the people we do?" Arelise asked, her voice soft in the flickering light of the fire. She looked down at her hands, fingers moving absently, as if contemplating a far-off idea. John leaned back against the ship's wall, eyes studying the stars outside the viewport. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I've met a lot of people in my travels, but none like you. There's something about this, us. It doesn't feel like chance." Arelise looked up at him, her violet eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper. "You mean you don't believe in fate?" she asked, her tone gentle, as if testing the waters of his beliefs. John paused, thinking carefully. "I'm not sure. I've always believed in making my own path, but I can't help but feel like we're here for a reason. Maybe the universe doesn't give us all the answers, but sometimes it gives us a nudge. Like it did with us." There was a quiet moment where neither spoke, the hum of the ship and the crackle of the fire the only sounds. For a long time, Arelise had kept her emotions locked away, protecting herself from the pain of her past. But something about John's presence allowed her to open up, even if just a little. "You know," she began slowly, her voice almost a whisper, "I used to believe in the stories of the ancients, the tales of our ancestors who walked among the stars as if they were destined for greatness. But I lost that belief when everything was destroyed. Now, all I have are fragments, memories, and the guilt that follows me wherever I go. John's heart tightened as he listened to her, realizing the depth of her loss. She had lost everything, the life she knew, her family, her world, and now, she was adrift in a galaxy that seemed indifferent to her suffering. You don't have to carry that guilt, John said softly, his voice earnest. What happened to your people wasn't your fault. You did everything you could. Arelise looked away, her eyes distant. It doesn't feel that way, she murmured. I should have been stronger. I should have known what was coming. But I didn't. John reached out, placing a hand gently on hers. The touch was simple, but it carried the weight of everything unsaid, a promise of understanding, a gesture of solidarity. You're here now. And that's what matters. You can't change the past, but you can shape what comes next. Her gaze met his, a flicker of emotion passing through her eyes, something raw, something vulnerable. For a moment, she let herself believe his words, allowing them to settle deep within her. It was the first time in weeks that she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, despite the darkness she carried, there was still a chance for something better, something meaningful. Thank you, John, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't think I could trust anyone again, but you've shown me that not all humans are like the ones who betrayed us. John smiled gently, squeezing her hand. You don't have to trust all humans, just the ones who deserve it. He paused, giving her a reassuring smile. And I'm definitely one of the good ones. Arelise chuckled, a sound that was foreign to her lips after so much sadness, and the air seemed to lighten around them. It wasn't much, just a moment of laughter, but it was enough to remind both of them that, even in the darkest of times, there was room for light. The next morning, their routine resumed. John was busy recalibrating the ship's engines, preparing for their journey to the next system, where they hoped to find more answers. Arelise, though still cautious, began to take on more tasks, helping with navigation, providing input on strategies for survival, and, occasionally, offering her unique perspective on the galaxies they were exploring. As they traveled together, John saw a new side to her. She wasn't just a princess in hiding, she was a skilled navigator, a brilliant strategist, and, in many ways, a survivor who was carving out a new purpose. Despite the danger that loomed around them, they continued to grow closer, their relationship evolving beyond the boundaries of simple camaraderie. John found himself not just protecting her, but caring for her in ways he hadn't expected. And Arelise, once so guarded, found herself opening up more and more, even when it terrified her. She didn't want to get attached, she couldn't afford to, but somewhere deep inside, she knew that John was becoming more than just a rescuer. He was becoming her partner, her confidant, and, perhaps in time, something more. As they continued their journey across the stars, they encountered new species, forged unexpected alliances, and faced challenges that pushed them both to their limits. Yet, through it all, their bond only grew stronger. Whether in the heat of battle or the quiet moments shared between missions, they found themselves relying on each other in ways neither had anticipated. One evening, as they drifted through the nebula clouds of a distant star system, Arelise stood at the observation deck, staring out at the swirling colors of the nebula. The hues of purple and gold reflected in her eyes, giving her an ethereal quality. John stood beside her, silent for a moment, watching the stars. Then, he turned to her and said, "You're different now. Stronger, I mean." Arelise smiled softly, though there was a sadness in her gaze. Maybe I'm just learning to live with the pain. To move forward. To find a reason to keep going. John's heart swelled with admiration for her. Whatever happens, you don't have to do it alone. For the first time in a long while, Arelise allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her, a future where she wasn't defined by her past, but by the choices she made now. Together, they looked out at the stars, a silent understanding passing between them. In the vastness of space, surrounded by danger and uncertainty, they had found something worth fighting for, a connection that could transcend galaxies, a bond forged not just by survival, but by trust, compassion, and the hope of a better tomorrow. And as their journey continued, they knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, they would face it together. The unseen forces. The days aboard the ship passed in a blur, as John and Arelise delved deeper into their journey through the stars. The quiet hum of the engines and the constant swirl of cosmic dust outside became the backdrop to their shared life, as each new planet they encountered only added to the growing complexity of their bond. Arelise, once so distant and guarded, was beginning to embrace her new reality, a life that was no longer defined by her past. But as they ventured farther into the galaxy, an undeniable tension began to build in the air, something neither could yet put into words. They had just entered the Chavik Nebula, a vast cloud of gas and dust that was rumored to be a hotbed of strange anomalies and hidden dangers. The nebula's swirling tendrils seemed to beckon them forward, its vibrant colors shifting in ways that made the universe feel smaller and more intimate. It was a place where the usual rules of space travel didn't always apply, and John had heard rumors of entire ships disappearing without a trace within its depths. But there was no turning back now. They had to push forward, both in their quest for answers about Arelise's people and their attempt to understand the vast alien presence that seemed to loom over their every move. As John piloted the ship deeper into the nebula, the ship's instruments began to malfunction. First, the navigational systems flickered, then the communication array sputtered to life, only to die again. Arelise, standing next to John, furrowed her brow in confusion. "This is no ordinary nebula," she murmured, her voice heavy with a mix of awe and wariness. "There's something about it. I've heard stories of ships that went in and never came out." John gritted his teeth. "I've heard the same, but we don't have much of a choice. We're running low on fuel, and this nebula is the closest place with an energy source we can tap into." Arelise nodded, her eyes never leaving the ever-shifting clouds outside the viewports. She knew all too well that danger could lurk where least expected. But there was something else in the air, a presence that she couldn't shake. It felt as though something was watching them, moving within the nebula, unseen but very much present. Her instincts told her that this was no ordinary environmental anomaly. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, throwing both of them off balance. The lights flickered, and a loud, jarring screech rang out from the hull. "Hold on!" John shouted, gripping the controls as best as he could. "Something's pulling us in." Arelise's eyes widened as the ship's course began to shift, against all the manual override commands John was trying to give. "This isn't just the nebula's gravity," she said, her voice shaking. "We're being pulled by something else. Something intelligent." Before John could react, a massive distortion appeared in the viewport, a dark, swirling vortex, unlike anything they had seen before. It was as if the fabric of space itself was bending and warping, pulling them closer to its event horizon. They were trapped. With quick thinking, John slammed his hand down on the emergency throttle, trying to break free, but it was no use. The ship was drawn closer to the vortex with increasing speed. Arelise's heart raced as she realized the full extent of the danger they were in. She had heard tales of mysterious forces in deep space, beings that existed beyond the scope of normal space travel, hidden entities that manipulated the very fabric of reality. But she never truly believed in them, until now. The vortex was alive with energy, rippling and twisting with dark tendrils of power. The ship's hull groaned under the pressure, the walls rattling as though something was trying to tear them apart from the inside. Arelise gripped the edge of the console, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "We need to get out of here," she shouted. "Into the abyss." John's mind raced as he fought with the controls of the ship. The vortex in front of them was growing larger, its swirling tendrils of dark energy reaching out like hungry fingers, pulling the ship toward its center. He could feel the weight of the pressure bearing down on the hull, the force of the unknown pulling them into an ever-tightening grip. The once steady hum of the engines was replaced by an eerie, unnatural sound, a high-pitched whine that echoed throughout the ship. "Stay calm, Arelise," John said, though his voice betrayed the uncertainty he felt. His hands moved quickly over the controls, trying to override the ship's systems and break free from the gravitational pull. But no matter what he did, the ship remained locked on its path. The vortex was not a natural phenomenon, it was something else, something far more powerful and intelligent. It was as if the nebula itself had a consciousness, an awareness of their presence, and it was making its move. "John, look!" Arelise cried out, pointing toward the viewport. John followed her gaze, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw something that defied logic, a shape, a shadow, moving within the swirling darkness. It was massive, far larger than any ship he had ever encountered. It wasn't just a presence, it was a living entity, its form undulating and shifting, as though it existed outside the boundaries of space and time. He couldn't make out its true shape, but there was no mistaking that it was watching them. "It's alive," Arelise whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. "Whatever this is, it's not just a force of nature, it's a sentient being." John's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the gravity of their situation. They weren't just trapped by a nebula, they were being drawn into the territory of something far more ancient and far more dangerous. The entity in the depths of the nebula wasn't just a passive observer. It was actively manipulating the very fabric of their reality, pulling them closer with every passing second. "I don't know if we can survive this," John muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on the controls. "If we get any closer to that thing, we might not get out. We need to break free now." Arelise's face was pale, but there was a fire in her eyes, a fierce determination that John had come to admire. She wasn't the type to run away from danger. "There has to be a way out," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We can't just give up." John's mind raced, but all his training told him that their only chance of escape was to use the ship's energy reserves to boost the engines and push through the gravitational field. But with the systems malfunctioning, it would take a miracle to make it work. He had to try. "Hold on tight," he said, a determined resolve in his voice. He slammed his fist down on the emergency systems, activating the backup thrusters with every ounce of power the ship could muster. The ship groaned, its systems struggling to keep up with the overwhelming forces pulling at it. The vortex howled louder, its energy growing, as though it were feeding off the ship's attempts to escape. The hull vibrated violently, and John felt a surge of terror wash over him. For a moment, he thought they would be torn apart by the sheer force of the entity's power. Then, just as hope seemed to fade, the backup thrusters flared to life. The ship surged forward with a violent jolt, breaking free from the gravitational pull of the vortex. The distortion around them began to lose its hold, and the ship shot out of the event horizon at an astonishing speed. John's heart hammered in his chest as the ship cleared the vortex, its influence slowly fading behind them. They were free. They had survived. But as they drifted away from the nebula, John realized that they hadn't just escaped the pull of the entity. They had entered something far deeper, something far more dangerous. "John, look," Arelise whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. John turned to face her, and his gaze followed hers to the viewports. For a moment, his mind refused to comprehend what he was seeing. The nebula behind them had begun to shift, its swirling tendrils forming a shape that was far more intricate, far more deliberate. It was as though the entity, now aware of their escape, had turned its attention fully on them. A massive shadow began to emerge from the nebula, an enormous, towering form, unlike anything John had ever seen. It was not a ship, but a living creature, its body made of pure energy, glowing with an unnatural light. It seemed to stretch and pulse with an intelligence that was both alien and ancient, a being that had existed long before humans had even dreamed of space travel. The creature began to move, its form rippling and shifting as it drew closer to them. It wasn't hostile, not yet. But its presence alone was enough to make John's blood run cold. There was something in its movements, something in the way it seemed to study them, that sent a chill down his spine. It was as though the creature was not just aware of their existence, it was waiting for something. John turned back to Arelise, his mind spinning. "What is that thing?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Arelise was staring out the viewport, her face pale. "I don't know," she said slowly. "But I've heard stories of such creatures. They are called the Jadar, the ancient guardians of the nebula. They are said to have existed for eons, watching over this part of the galaxy. But no one has ever encountered one and survived." John's heart sank. "So what does it want with us?" Arelise shook her head. "I don't know. But if the stories are true, we've just crossed into their domain. And I don't think they take kindly to trespassers." The ship's instruments flickered, warning lights flashing as the Jadar's presence began to interfere with their systems. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, the very fabric of space vibrating in response to the creature's power. It was as though the creature was testing them, probing their minds, assessing their intentions. John swallowed hard, his mind racing. The Jadar were no ordinary beings, they were ancient, powerful, and enigmatic. He had no idea how to approach such a force, and the thought of facing one in the heart of its domain filled him with a sense of dread. But Arelise's voice broke through his thoughts, steady and firm. "We need to stay calm. Whatever happens, we need to show them that we mean no harm. The Jadar respect strength, but they also respect those who are willing to face them with courage." John nodded, though his mind was a swirl of uncertainty. He didn't know how to approach the Jadar, but he knew one thing for sure, this was no longer just about survival. It was about something far bigger, something that would test both their resilience and their will to explore the unknown. They were standing on the precipice of a discovery that could change the course of their journey, and the fate of the galaxy itself. The Jadar continued to loom closer, its massive form radiating power, but John and Arelise stood together, ready to face whatever this ancient force had in store for them. Their journey had just taken a turn into the unknown, and neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain, they would face it together.